So firstly, I wish to acknowledge the people of the Kulin Nations on whose land we meet today, where I'm based. I pay my respects to their elders, past and present, and we extend that respect to First Nations peoples here today. ISCRR is a unique partnership between Monash University and WorkSafe Victoria. Over the past 13 years, we've had the pleasure of working with world-leading researchers around the globe in the field of workplace health and safety. And we're proud to be hosting today's session on Program Logic, presented by Dr. Sarah Oxford, who is ISCRR's Senior Research Officer and Specialist in Program Evaluation. Now, I've just realised I didn't introduce myself for those who don't know me. My name is Sam Barker and I'm the Director of ISCRR. Now, back to Sarah. Sarah designs and delivers qualitative and evaluation research projects for ISCRR. She has extensive experience conducting research with people from socially vulnerable backgrounds and managing projects from conception through to completion, whilst collaborating with a wide range of stakeholders. Her goal is to ensure that policy and decision makers achieve a deep and empathetic understanding of both the people, context and challenges that policy and programs aim to address. Not an easy feat. She is a really talented researcher and just a wonderful person, and I'm sure you will find her presentation insightful. We also have Dr. Janine McMillan with us today, and she's the lead of our internal research team, and she'll be monitoring the chat and also providing support and answering questions for Sarah. Now, before we kick into the session with Sarah, some of you may not know much about ISCRR, so I thought I'd just give you a little overview. So as I mentioned, we're a partnership with WorkSafe and Monash, and we were established back in 2009, also with the TAC, the Transport Accident Commission. And that partnership continues today, and we work together in a variety of ways. We have an internal research team, of which Sarah and Janine are a part of, that conducts a range of predominantly rapid research activities for WorkSafe and other government departments to directly inform their decision making, including rapid evidence reviews, evaluations and global scans. We are also conducting some longer term evaluations of health-based interventions. ISCRR also facilitates and brokers research led by other academics from both Monash and other universities across the country, and drive evidence-informed policy. Our translation team, of which Jimmy Twin is the lead, who's online with us today, they focus on the dissemination of research to optimise impact, uptake, and also increase knowledge. And this includes through sessions such as those that we're running today. So without further ado, I will hand over to Sarah.
Thanks so much, Sam, and thank you everyone for coming to this presentation on Program Logic. All right, so what will you learn today? So we're going to go through 5 things. What is Program Logic? Why use Program Logic? How has Program Logic been used? So a few examples. How does it help with evaluations? And where can you learn more? So here's a scenario, which I'm sure most of you have been in. Maybe that's why you're here today. Maybe you've wanted to work on a project, a behavior change project for a long time. It lands on your desk and your excitement soon turns to anxiety. You get those butterflies in your belly as you're thinking, oh my gosh, what is my next step? How do I get from A to Z? How do I explain my strategies, my outcomes? How do I do this on budget? How do I make sure it's efficient and effective? And this is where you step in and Program Logic can essentially become your hero. So what is a Program Logic? In simple terms, it's a roadmap of your program. So it's a visual representation, a one-page document of what your program intends to do and how it will do it. So this covers what the program is, what is needed to deliver it, how it's delivered, and what it is expected to achieve. So again, pretty high level. It also demonstrates intended relationships between these stages, but it's actually much more than just a roadmap. And this is why I find it really useful, and I suggest that people use Program Logic. One of the biggest benefits of it is its brainstorming capacity. So It gets you in the room with people working on the project, with potential stakeholders who are invested in the project, to share ideas and to clarify assumptions, ideally at the very beginning of your project. So by having this space and framework to work together, you can use a program logic to underpin program design and planning, to bring detail to broad goals, and to help identify gaps in logic, making beliefs explicit and clarifying assumptions. It's also really useful for implementation. So it helps build understanding and promote consensus. Imagine if you have a team, but everyone has slightly different goals. You're getting in a room and you're nutting out what your understanding is, what your goal is. It creates a roadmap that you can share with other people. It informs your program delivery, and it saves money and resources because you're organized, you're thinking through processes, you're able to plan better. And then the third point that I always like to make about why using program logic is it's really helpful with communication. So you're summarizing your complex program in usually a one-page document that you can share with maybe a supervisor or stakeholders or someone who's just interested in what you're doing. So it's a really powerful communication tool in this way. But it also helps clarify your evaluation framework. So and I'll explain this towards the end. When you build your program logic, you can use that to help with your evaluation framework to inform it. So when is the best time to use program logic? And it's a bit of a silly question because you can use program logic anytime. You can use it as you're scaling up to inform that process, but the best time is to use it in program planning because you can then use it in concert with your evaluation as it will feed into it. It also helps to get the team in a room to help scope down and pick out your outcomes. And so program planning stage is the best, but it's never too late. So we've gone through these things and now you're thinking, well, what does this actually look like? So here are the core components. The first is the problem statement. And I usually, when I run workshops, I ask teams to have their problem statement identified before they come in the room. And then we might work on it some more to break it down, to make it succinct, to make sure we're addressing, what the problem is, why it's a problem, for whom it's a problem, who are the stakeholders, what is known. We really want this to be in one succinct statement, and we want it to help lay out the scope of the program logic, which can be quite challenging. But again, if you have everyone in the room, you can realize then what everyone thinks the problem is and come to consensus on this. The next step is your inputs. So this is what you invest in, your resources. We're going from left to right when we read a program logic. Next is strategies and activities. So this is what you do. Next is your outputs. This is what you create. And then we're going to have short-term, medium-term, and long-term outcomes. So this depends on the project. You might just have medium-term and long-term. You might have a project that's 6 months, and so you're saying, okay, the short-term is a few weeks, medium-term is a few months, maybe long-term is after 6 months, something like that. It really varies by project. I think of short-term outcomes as your learnings. I think of medium-term outcomes as changes in action. And I think of long-term outcomes as changes in condition. And I'm going to go through these with examples in a second, don't worry. Then you have two other factors. You have assumptions. Assumptions can make or break a program or project. So you really want to come up with the things that you're assuming will take place. You're assuming your strategy will lead to that output. Okay, why? Let's unpack that to make sure we're on the same page. And then you have external factors. So these are things that are completely out of your control, but they could definitely shape or challenge your program. So this might be a pandemic or a change in leadership or a government directive, things like that. So let's look at these components with examples. So your inputs, these are tangible or intangible. Tangible meaning money, a building, a road, things like that. But there's also intangible things. What about you have your staff, but also you have the relationships that your staff have with other people? Do you need someone championing your cause? Do you need to have good rapport among your stakeholders? These are inputs that need to be considered. Then we have activities. Strategies and activities is what we do. So maybe you design a course. Maybe you write legislation. Maybe you provide resources or space and time to use those resources, such as sporting activities. Next, we have outputs. So this is what you create. So this is what directly results from your activities. So your outputs might be that you have 50 people attend your course. Your legislation might be accepted by government, or at the bottom example, you have people participating in that sport. And then you have your outcomes. This is your change in action. So now you have people who have new knowledge, new ideas. You have, and then second example, you have a more equitable society. And then the third example, you have behavior change. And then you have your blue sky impact. This is what you dream to happen. You have a healthier society and you have a happier society. So those are some examples of the components of program logic. So let's break this down a little further, and then I'm going to get you involved. So inputs, again, these are what we invest in. Outputs, these are what is done with the program. Outcomes, this is what results from the program. So I'm going to stop there, and I'm screaming outcomes, outcomes, outcomes. And I'm screaming this because often we get a new program or project directive and we're really excited. We have all of these ideas, all of these strategies we want to put in place, and we go gangbusters. And then 6 months down the track, someone changes jobs, you lose funding, it kind of falls to pieces. So with program logics, we actually focus on outcomes first and we work backwards. And this is called backcasting. And this helps with exploring assumptions. It helps with getting everyone on the same page. It helps with making sure that A actually leads to Z when you're working on your project and program. So in the next example, we're going to put our outcomes first, and I'm going to have you go through a problem statement. So in the chat, so the problem is that a house is on fire. Quite simple statement. That's an issue. So I want you to come up with an not yet. I want you to come up with an outcome. In the perfect world, what actually is the outcome from this situation? I'll open the chat. I can't see it. So what do you think? Yes, Margot, the fire's put out. Anything else? Anything else we should consider? Again, you can use your imagination. It's a very, yeah, the people are okay. Perfect. Everyone is safe. Great. And you're right. So the outcome here, very generic example, the fire stops, the people are saved from the fire. So what is your output? What do we need to have done to lead to this outcome? The fire's put out, yes. Alarm system in place. How's the fire put out? People working together. Who are the people working together, Laura? Yeah, so we have the firefighters working together. What are they actually doing? They have a method to put out the fire. What do you think their method is to put out the fire? Spray water on the fire. Great. Nice, Jessica. So we have our outputs. The firefighters climb the ladder. The firefighters spray the water. The firefighters bring the people down the ladder. So they're doing these actions, and these are the outputs from the action that lead to the outcome. So now we're going to talk about resources. What are the inputs? What do we need to lead to the outputs? Fire engines, trained firefighters. Yeah, exactly. Trucks, ladders, firefighters, someone to call them. So we have a ladder, we have a hose with water, we have firefighters. Good work. So now let's think of some of the assumptions. Hi, Peter. What are some assumptions that we've made about this program logic? What are we assuming will happen? Yeah, that the firefighters are available, that the people are trained, that water will actually put out the fire. Great examples. That someone calls them to begin with. Perfect. We got it. Now let's think of external factors. What are some external factors that could affect this, the outputs and the outcomes? Absolutely. So maybe there's actually many houses on fire. Maybe the phone lines are down. Maybe there's been a strike and there's no firefighters. Maybe there's traffic accidents that block the fire truck from getting there. Exactly. You've got this. Great job. Okay. So now you know what a program logic looks like and you know how to weave your way through it. When we finalize a program logic, we then go through if and then statements. And we do this essentially to uncover the theory of change, because when you have a program logic, that's what you're designing, this theory of how your change is going to occur and how it's going to drive your program. So next I'm going to look at a program logic that we did with WorkSafe Victoria, and we're going to go through it with if and then statements. So let's apply that here. And it is going to be busy on your screen, so just take a moment, take a breath. But it's this is generally what a program logic looks like. Sometimes they're more high level, sometimes they're more detailed. It just depends. So while I just told you that we develop a program logic from working right to left, when we read the program logic to make sense of it, we're going to work left to right. And sometimes when you're developing it, you end up having to go left to right just to make sense of things. So the problem statement is that agents and treating health practitioners don't have access to clinical experts, and they need this information to progress the injured worker towards recovery. So we worked as a team to brainstorm this program logic, and we said, okay, what are the inputs? What do we need to invest? If we have WorkSafe staff, again, I'm on the left of the screen, if we have external stakeholders, if we have technology and communication materials, then what happens? Then what we do is we develop a service blueprint, we develop communications and a hotline, so a phone hotline. We conduct working group meetings, internal meetings, and an evaluation. If we do these things, if we develop and we conduct, so if we do these things, then what do we create? What happens? Then we have a hotline. Then we have partnerships with primary health networks, peak bodies, and agents. If we create these outputs, then what results? What happens in the short term within 3 months? What are our learnings? So if we create these things, then the stakeholders know there is a hotline and the correct usage of the hotline. The treating health practitioners and the agents have called the hotline. This is starting to get in past tense because we're saying this is what we've done. They've had a positive experience. They've received answers and acted. They've had increased capability and confidence. Whereas WorkSafe have learned who uses the hotline, what information is needed, what hours are best, and what are the staffing needs. If we have these learnings within the first 3 months, then what changes to action do we see within the next 3 months? So calling the hotline has become an embedded practice for treating health practitioners and agents. There's reduced queries to the medical advisors. The claim decisions from hotline callers have become faster. And the injured workers supported by hotline callers have received support faster. So if we have these changes in action that we're going for, then what changes do we have to condition? What we have is improved outcomes for injured workers. Hotline callers have a better perception of WorkSafe. And WorkSafe understands the knowledge gaps and learnings and learn the needs of the treating health practitioners and agents. So I hope that made sense for you. You can throw an emoji in the chat if it did, or a question mark if it didn't. But essentially what an ideal program logic is one that makes sense to people who have not seen it before about the program. Now there's two things we also need to point out. The assumptions, a few things that maybe the hotline didn't exist. Thanks, Karen. Maybe the hotline had challenges with the budget. Maybe communications about the hotline didn't reach the target audience. So there's just things we need to consider as far as assumptions. And then there's external factors. Maybe an agent changed, maybe the government priority changed. So this is one example of a program logic. They all don't look like this. So one thing that's important to know, a criticism of program logic, is they're very high level and they're also very linear. But we know that life is not linear. So let me show you an example of a program logic that takes a different approach. If I can get my button right. So Community First Development is an organization that works with First Nations communities in Australia. And they developed a program logic, and they explained that their first round, it was quite linear. And then people started saying, well, that just doesn't make sense, because what we're trying to address, we work in an ecosystem, and all of these challenges and all of the outcomes we're aiming for affect one another. So they came up with this, which is obviously not linear, but more connected. So their impact, so their long-term outcome is self-determination, whereas the short-term outcomes and the outputs are the smaller circles that surround self-determination. The inputs are the gray circles at the bottom and top, and then the activities are the community-led achievements and community-owned achievements. Now you can see this is very high level, but it's also very connecting. So there's various ways to visualize program logics, and these are just two examples that I want to show you. So I think it's important that we understand how program logics are used in evaluation. I suppose this is the evaluator in me. If we look at this slide, you can see that the linear version of the program logic that I showed you is actually in the red and orange squares. So this is just kind of imprinted on top of that. And if you're thinking of evaluating your program, which you'd want to start as early as you can, then you might want to think about, well, what are we actually evaluating for? Are we looking for program efficiency? And if so, we might want to evaluate the activities and outputs. Or are we looking for effectiveness? And if that's the case, then look at your outcomes and your impacts. Or maybe you need to do a little bit of both, or maybe you realize that you actually need to go back and do a needs assessment. But what happens with the program logic is we can take the things that we list, the components that we list, the points that we list under each component in a program logic, and then we can then turn that into a question that can be used in our evaluation. So let me give you an example. So this is taken from the WorkSafe program logic that I showed you a moment ago. So if the component is the output, then the example could be an example of one of the outputs from that was partnerships formed. And so the evaluation question could be, how many groups are participating in monthly meetings? And your indicator might be the number of groups participating. Now, maybe that's not the question you want to ask. And this is where it helps with program logic, because you can say, okay, well, who's our target audience? And also think about your knowledge translation later. Maybe the question is, to what extent are these groups participating? And your indicator is going to be talking about the extent of that participation, which then you might need to do some interviews or focus groups, or maybe quantitatively track how often people talk or participate. Another example, so on the second line, is short-term outcomes. So the example being, was the hotline being used? So the evaluation question is, how many calls are being made per month? And the indicator could be the number of calls per month. And then an example of a medium-term outcome could be, the hotline became an embedded practice. So the evaluation question would then be, has calling the hotline become an embedded practice for treating health practitioners? And so you, as your indicator, you would see, have practitioners identified that the hotline is an embedded practice for them? So just an example, and this is very high level. Again, if you're actually, your framework would show how your methods, who would be responsible, a timeline, and you might group things together. I just wanted you to see how they can really how program logics can really be used to help your evaluation come together. So to review, what is a program logic? It is a program roadmap, but it is not an evaluation, but it can help with your evaluation. It is a visual representation of relationships between program activities and outcomes, but it is not a measure of performance or program success. It is a program planning tool, but it is not a detailed implementation plan. If you want that, you need to go and do that. It is a communication tool, but it is not an evidence base for the program. How do we use a logic model? So I haven't mentioned this yet. Logic models are living documents. So you should refer to them throughout the life of your program and the evaluation, and you should amend them as needed, and then share that and make sure you're on the same page with everyone working on the program. So it's live. They are helpful to guide a program as it evolves and to ensure that everyone's focused on the key goals and outcomes. And logic models are very useful to inform your evaluation, especially when created in concert early on with the logic model. So why bother? I hope that you're walking away now saying, I know why bother, because you have a clarity of thinking. If you have everyone's ideas from their head on a page, it makes it much easier to be on the same page. Then have clarity of action. You know where to go because you have it there as your roadmap. It supports your evaluation. It's very easy as an evaluator to step in if there's a great program logic developed to say, okay, let's turn this around and see how we can measure your outcomes and your outputs. And it's a roadmap to translation. So translations often kind of put in the back burner, we'll get there. But if you include this and include translation early on, it'll help you think about what audience are we trying to reach? What information can we provide that audience? And when can we provide that information to that audience? So it's also helpful with that. So ISCA offers program logic workshops. If you're interested in more information on these, please get in touch with us. Workshops are tailored to the needs of your team. Often they take, I'd like to do them in 2 sessions so we can stop and reflect, and then I can give you an updated document that we've worked on. So I would say 2 days and about 3 hours each day, but again, it depends on the project. It also depends if you already have your problem statement and you know the scope of your work. It's practical and hands-on training. So we go through this with sticky notes or a Miro board if we can't be in the same room, and we brainstorm together. We get the wording right. People can often get stuck in wording, but we try to take a step back. We talk about who the intended audience is. So it's very practical and it's hands-on. You will walk away with a program logic. It should be a tangible takeaway that you can walk away with. And we're happy to provide you with ongoing support. So there are a lot of references out there that you can find through YouTube and through the internet about program logic. These are some that I've loved, some that have informed this presentation. So I just wanted to say thank you to the people who put these out there, and feel free to reach out if you want more information. So what have you learned today? I know it's been a lot. I hope you've learned what a program logic is, reasons to use a program logic, how program logics are used, how program logics can help inform evaluations, and where you can learn more. So with that, I'll open it up for questions, ask you to think about what are your next steps, what project are you working on that could use a program logic workshop, and to note down Janine's information if you want to get in touch with us about our services. So thanks so much.
Thanks for that, Sarah. The first question that's come through, how long did it take to develop that example that you showed?
We met with them multiple times. So there were 3 people on that team, which is quite small. And we met over Zoom, probably over 2 weeks. We met back and forth. But I would say it was smaller. This one didn't take as much time as others because it was a smaller group of people. So I would say a week to 2 weeks for this one, but with shorter conversations. Again, it's tailored to your project.
Would change management principles feature in implementation plans rather than program logic?
I think you can do them in both, but you want to consider them within the outcomes of your program logic.
And another question, what are some of the pitfalls that can occur with program logic?
Yeah, so often with program logic, people struggle to determine the scope. And so we really, at the early stages, want your team to get together and decide what the scope is and what's actually feasible, and to make a really clear problem statement. So that's often an issue, is the problem statement won't be clear and everyone won't be on the same page. So I would say to think about that. Another thing is that the process can be time consuming, but it's well worth it if you put in the time. So you want to make sure that people don't get stuck in the details, and that and that's where facilitators come in handy, to consider the timelines and to make sure that you stay on task.
And I'm sure this is going to be a challenge for many people when they're starting out. How do you build a consensus among the diverse opinions when creating a logic model?
Yeah, so that's where it's really good to have everyone in the room and to have a facilitator to discuss these and to go through activities where you hear everyone out, you give everyone equal speaking time, and you come to consensus together. So I think the best response to that is to have a facilitator from the outside who helps you with that process.
And another question that's come through, if the evaluation is being done by someone else or another group to those developing the program, are the evaluators typically involved in the development of the program logic?
They may or may not be. It's helpful if they are, or if you share it with them and get their feedback. As an evaluator, I would love to be a part of it to a certain extent, if not the whole thing. So it's really helpful if they are, because then they can see where maybe you've made assumptions, where there might be challenges that they can help improve for the evaluation. So I would include them as best you can, but obviously it's not always feasible.
And this is one question that I want to know the answer to as well, that what makes a great logic model as opposed to an average one?
Yeah, so a great logic model is one that you can hand over to essentially a stranger or someone who's not working on your project, and they understand what you're doing. So I hope this one in front of you worked in that way. That's ideally what a great logic model is. It's not always the case, but it really makes it easy. You can see that a lot of organizations will post their logic models online. And so hopefully you can go through that and understand their goals and how they anticipate to reach their outcomes.
So the next question is that the program logic that you put up was quite busy, but if you have an even more complex project, is there a way to simplify things?
Well, what we often do with program logics is we refine it and refine it and refine it some more. So it depends on who your target audience is and keeping them in mind and how you refine it. Another option, so that you can make it more and more simple, right? If you have a very complex project and it has multiple streams, multiple strategies and activities, then you might want to consider doing a theory of change instead, which shows more of the explanations between the components and versus a logic model, which is more descriptive. But again, that would actually make it look probably more complicated. But if you have a more complicated project, you might want to go down that route. Otherwise, it's more about working with your communications, the team, and making it as simple as possible without, I guess, losing necessary details.
Can you talk a bit more about that relationship between program logic and theory of change?
Yeah, so imagine a theory of change is kind of like multiple program logics working together in tandem. So often it's relies more on evidence and going into it, and it's just much more detailed. It also includes causal mechanisms. So instead of just saying, if I do X, Y will happen, it's like, well, Y could happen, or Z could happen, or Y and Z could happen. So it's much more detailed in that way. But both work, just depending on what kind of project you have and what you're looking to do. So again, logic is more descriptive, theory of change is more explanatory, much more detailed.
But do you have an example, and perhaps this is from your previous work with sports programs, that you have an example of how program logic has benefited a service delivery program, for example, a client-based intake and referral model?
I mean, I think the hotline one has worked really well as far as if you consider the treating health practitioners the clients. We've just had really good reception with the hotline and figuring out, well, what are the avenues to make it improve better? And the program logic really, I think is the best example because I've just shown you, but it really set up the different possibilities and made us think through, well, should we shift it? Should it be a model where it's online and we're doing a chatbot, or should it be, I'm not sure, through email? But it really focused on what the client needed and helping us figure out what that was as the project progressed.
Where does using program logic in strategy development in implementation lie? So strategy doesn't always start with a problem. So I guess even though strategy doesn't always start with a problem, there's always something that's looking to achieve. Like, for instance, WorkSafe, we're always looking to make workplaces safer, and they're always looking to help injured workers get better and get back to life quicker. So, any sort of organisation has some sort of aim, and then within that, there's a whole lot of, smaller ones. So I guess even though it may not start with a problem, there's, all organisations will have some sort of goal and aim, and, that could be, and any sort of portion of that could be made into a program logic.
And we've also done them before. Sorry, Janine. We've also done them before where you actually don't start with the outcomes because you can't. You have to kind of work among the different pillars and then bring it all together. So sometimes the strategies are already in place, the activities are already in place. And so you have to kind of negotiate a bit when you're putting it together.
So I'll pose this question to both of you, Sarah and Janine, and we may have this as the last question unless another one sneaks through in the next few seconds. That how do you factor in risks and contingencies that may eventuate that could disrupt the linear process progression implied in that common program logic? And can you give any examples of how you can show this in action?
I think the best way is to use the assumptions and the external factors spaces for those to talk about risk. So in the WorkSafe example I gave, a risk was that an agent might leave, and that did happen, which then put a lot of pressure on the other agents that were working with the project. Or there could be a government directive that changes. So there's a lot of risks, and you do have to talk through those, and you also have to talk through the assumptions. So being upfront about those early on is really helpful, because again, assumptions can make or break your project, and the risks are a part of that.
I also use them as a live document. So I go back and review them throughout the project. So sometimes, you realize your assumptions are having more of an impact. And then, or kind of those external factors, and you need to go back and readjust either your expectations or your strategies. And especially for longer projects, it works really well as a live document, and just keep going back to the program logic and saying, are we still on track? And then you might need to modify either maybe your inputs, and you've got some new inputs, and it might lead you to some outcomes and things like that. So using them as a live document really helps to support any changes throughout, and kind of counteracts that linear approach that program logics use.
And just one more quick answer to that one as well is that I often think some of the theory of changes that I've done, where they're a lot more step by step by step, and exactly the theory of exactly how in a lot more detail. And sometimes you often have arrows going everywhere. So sometimes you might, okay, this is the goal, and there's a number of ways to get to that goal. And so if something goes wrong with any one of the steps, then that can, having other options to get there can be helpful. And that's not going to work for every program, obviously. But sometimes, at that early time, thinking about, what things may or may, like we talked about, what are the risks, and that can really help, working them out early, and then maybe having more than one option if possible. As I said, it's not always possible, but sometimes. Yeah.
Well, thanks, Janine, Sarah, and Carmen